Swordsman,
Spearsman,
Axeman.
lend us your shields. Welcome back to the Brothers Gwynne. Today we're carrying on our little series of videos talking about the context of Shadow of the Gods, the kit, the gear, the terminology. Last week we did a video about the glossary, and this week we'll be talking about some of the kit, looking specifically at some of the characters in Shadow of the Gods and talking about what they'll be wearing. From the POV characters of Orca, of Varg, of Elvar, to Yaromir and Sulik as well.
So to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about Elvar and Varg. Okay, now these are two of the main POVs in the Shadow of the Gods. There will be minor spoilers ahead where we're talking about some of the equipment, but it will be only very minor. Okay, so to start with, I am dressed as how Elvar would dress, and William is being Varg, how he begins his journey before he meets the Blood Swan. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the historical references, because Dad's writing is seeping and dripping with historicalness, if that's a word. I don't know what it is, if it is, but so to start with,
I just want to say, just obviously a summary, Elvar is
Yes.
much more experienced warrior, as you can see, wearing her Brynja, full armor, full protection, as compared to Varg, who's just beginning his journey really as a warrior. He has a cleaver, and we'll talk about what else he has, but obviously he's a lot more exposed. But now let's get into a few more of the details.
so let's talk about William to start with. William is dressed as Varg. Here in the Norse world, they would wear an under tunic of linen underneath an over tunic of wool. Okay, and these are cut to very similar shapes, so sometimes you're better to see the undergarments, sometimes you wouldn't be able to, but here it is. It's got a V-neck and it comes down to just above the knee. Now William has a cloak. It's very, very common for people to have cloaks. Seeing as he was a thrall, he probably stole it, or a cloak would have been used for anything such as where you sleep. It can even be your pillow, your blanket, anything like that.
Very versatile.
Used to storing goods, and also when you want to look inconspicuous or hide something, a cloak is good. Yeah, don't do that. A cloak is a good thing to use, because we have his pouch here. We know that Varg has a pouch with a lock of his sister Freya's hair. So that would be used to carry, this pouch here would be used to carry just several small things, okay? Now, after Varg meets the Blood Swan, he goes out with Sulik to go and buy a few different things. But before he does that, he meets a trusty cleaver, doesn't he? Trying to buy something. I think he's trying to buy a bit of food and a bit of information as well. And he picks up the cleaver. Now, when we were about to do this video, I was thinking, have we actually got a cleaver? I don't know. And I said to Mum, Mum, have we got cleaver anywhere? She goes, follow me. And she had about 6, and I thought this looks
a bit
coolest.
worrying.
Yeah, this looks the oldest. So so that is a cleaver, obviously, and Varg uses a cleaver. And later on,
Varg goes and buys a Francisca axe. Is that how you pronounce it?
Francisca, yeah.
Francisca axe, and this is a throwing axe, but it can also be used in combat, but primarily for throwing. As you can see, this is angled so that the weight is going down to allow for it to spin and be a bit more aerodynamic, and therefore aids obviously the purpose of it being a throwing axe. And so the next item that Varg gets is his trusty throwing axe, which over the course of the Shadow of the Gods you will see that he uses many a time. Now William here has a pair of breeks. They're nothing too fancy, as Varg is only recently a thrall, and then he has a pair of turn shoes, not turn boots. These are shoes, a little bit wet from the weather, but they are called turn shoes because Viking shoes, they would make them on the inside out, so they would sew them the opposite way, and then right at the end they would turn it inside out, so they're called turn shoes. Then they're ready. But yeah, let's move on. And so to begin with, we can talk about a nasal helm, which Varg gets. Is the most basic type of helmet, basically. It will be fashioned from one piece of iron, as the Vikings or Norsemen had not discovered steel at this point in the historical period. This is very basic, but still it gives you vital protection. Everyone would need a helmet, because as they say in the Shadow of the Gods, if you get a wound to the leg or the arm, you may survive, but a wound to the head, most likely not. So this is arguably one of the most important parts of kit. And then next up we have this short spear. Ed, if you take the helmet off.
Absolutely.
We have a short spear. This is one of the most basic weapons as well. Obviously it'd be one of the cheaper ones because, again, less metal, more wood. The more wood in a weapon and the less metal means that it would be cheaper, and a spear would be one of the first weapons that you learn to use. In our reenactment group, we started by learning the spear, and that is the first test they put us through.
Yeah, we're called the Spears of Andred, so it definitely does make sense.
It suits, yeah. And when you're going into combat, it's very important to wear some gloves, some hand protection. I think we learned pretty early on through just doing some silly sparring amongst ourselves that hand injuries are very common.
They're the most common, really.
They really are, because as you're thrusting with a spear or weapon, your hand is exposed, and it is behind the shield or whatever you're holding in your other hand as well. And so some trusty gloves are very important. These are made out of leather, and they're very sturdy. They protect your fingers and your hands. Of course, you can still get some injuries, and it is possible, but just the extra layer is very important. And then next for Varg, we have the shield, a big round shield which will be used in the shield wall. Everyone would have a very similar type with a boss in the middle, and on this shield we have our design of the Spears of Andred, but people may have put their own different designs for their own household or their lord, or maybe for their jarl. And that is around all that Varg has at the beginning of his journey.
Yeah, going back to gloves, talking about hand wounds, there are so many different types of hand wound, and you can see as weaponry developed later on into the 14th and the 15th centuries that shields got smaller, and they used something called a buckler, which is a very small style of shield, and they would also have a sword, very similar length and almost similar style really to Viking age swords. They'd have a longer crossguard though, so it protected your hand a bit more, and they would keep their buckler right next to their hand. They would never move it away from their hand, because that just shows how important the hands were for combat. If you lose a finger, if you lose use of your hand, you're done for in combat. So some leather gloves or something hard boiled would really do the job. Now obviously there's not too much evidence of leather gloves, but because leather rots, but it's not hard to imagine that they would, as Vikings, they would know they need to protect their hands, as is pretty common sense. But yeah, that's pretty much everything that Varg would have, and I'll move on to Elvar. So to start with, we have the Yaromir helmet, which is the only full helmet that has been discovered in use of the Norse people. So people from Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and also later on Iceland. Okay, so Yaromir is named after the grave find. Lots and lots of our archaeology discovered grave finds, Viking age objects and weapons and anything else is found mainly in graves that were preserved very well. Now, this style of helmet is called a spectacle helmet, an ocular helmet. I think it was found in the 9th century in Norway, which is where Yaromir is. It has here some 8mm wide rings of mail. Now, we can see this is a bit more of a high status helmet compared to William's nasal helm, purely because the style here takes a lot more time for an armourer to make, a blacksmith. It also has lots of decoration, things that aren't exactly used for practicalness, like the brass. It is practical, but its only purpose is that. Its purpose is to look a bit more show-offy, to show that you have fine war gear. You have someone who's gold-browed, and you have an eye for violence. So here we can see the rings of mail are lined in brass as well. That's pretty upper class. And it's pretty, there were finds in the Viking age with brass rings, so it definitely did happen.
And obviously it provides protection for the neck and the shoulders as well.
Yeah, the mail, this is called an aventail, and this, like William said, provides protection for the shoulder and the neck, because you definitely don't want to get stabbed there at all. Now, ring mail isn't great against thrusts, but the weapons used in the Viking age weren't as geared towards thrust, such as the 15th century swords. They still were, but they were still cutting and thrusting weapons. Obviously, no one wants to get stabbed, even if they're wearing ring mail and a helmet, in the head with a sword, because that's going to hurt and you might die anyway. And the staple then of Viking society's combat was the spear and the shield. Now, a spear is very easily made. We can see this is a much longer spear than William's spear that he had. This is a two-handed spear. Some people may use it as two-handed spear if they have a bit more skill, such as Orca does when she's trying to train Varg. But spears are excellent because you can have them underhand, you can have them overhand, okay, and you've got your shield ready, and you've got a long reach. I can cover half my body and I can reach down, okay. I can reach out across. I can then hold this up. If I'm in this shield wall locked beside my partner, I can back people's spears away and then stab. Okay, so that is one thing that's really good about spears. Also, spears are a lot cheaper to make than swords, okay, because it's mainly wood. It's got a very small iron head at the top, so that is why.
Sorry, we've just changed where we're filming this bit because the rain just came down like we were its enemy for a second there.
Thor was very upset with us.
So for the end of the chat about Elvar, we've just moved a bit undercover, only a bit, so you may hear some leaves rustling as well. But Ed, do you want to finish your chat about Elvar and her gear?
Absolutely. So the last thing here is that we have a sword. Now Elvar is a fine. She's a warrior. Sorry. She is accumulating a treasure chest, a sea chest of gold and goods, and she does have a sword. Now, this sword that I've had made is made by Heron Armory, a great swordsmith in the UK, and is based on a sword in Szczecin Museum that I saw on a video by Dimmer Carter and Roland Wojcicka. And this is a dueling sword. It has a silver wire grip, so it's a bit fancier than other swords.
And here I am dressed as Yaromir would be and his Druz Hinna from Iskadan. These would be typically elite mounted warriors. They would be archers, they would shoot on horseback mounted, but they would also be masters of the sword as well. So you encounter these in the Shadow of the Gods quite a few times, and I hope that this allows you to imagine them and see it in a more vivid manner next time you read the Shadow of the Gods.
Now, Dad's writing is steeped in historical influences, and we can see here the historical influences within William's dress. For example, the Eastern Rus style of the Druz Hinna, who rode up and down the Dnieper River in the Slavic lands, fighting the Pechenegs and the Sarks down in Sarkland as well. They had vast land for trading up and down the rivers of Eastern Europe, all the way down to the Byzantine Empire, down to Micklegarth. Now here, William is wearing a horsehair plume helmet with a nasal guard and his ringmail. This horsehair plume shows their affinity for horses and the horse culture that they adopted, similar to the Magyars, who were around at a similar period as well. Now, this horsehair plume in particular is actually the old tale of a horse of ours called Faithful, who sadly passed away, but we have this to remember him by, and it looks amazing. William is also wearing his lamellar plate armor made by Kvetin Armory of Russia. Some very awesome mail and also armor and weaponry makers. He also has a bow as well in the compound recurve style of the Magyars, and he has a saber. I think this was called the Charlemagne saber of that period as well. He's got his kaftan on, his baggy trousers, which are very popular at very many festivals today, music festivals. If you go to Reading Festival, you'll see everyone wearing something very similar to that. This is Courage, a warhorse in training. He's doing fantastically well. This is his first time actually with William wearing all of this armor. Just the flies are a little bit irritating, but he's doing such a good job. Good boy, Courage. So this is Prince Yaromir of Iskidan, and here he's actually smiling, whereas in the book he doesn't seem to smile.
Welcome, Courage.
So Courage is a warhorse in training. That's why I'm leading him on a lead rein. He's not used to the sounds as of yet, but he's doing such a great job. He's wonderful. He's actually a cob, a really hardy breed from the UK. But yeah, he's a fantastic horse. Courage really suits him. He's doing well. Just getting used to the sounds and all of the different feelings, the textures of the armor. Now, he is a warhorse, so he's going to have to get used to this sooner or later. Let's turn him around. There was evidence in history of Magyar-style warriors, similar to how William is dressing with his bow and arrows and his horse, of living in Birka, which is a market town in Sweden, one of the best lavish of its time. And they would have their horses housed outside the town. But that's just a little snippet of history where horses were actually quite a pivotal role for people of the Old Norse and Viking cultures. You don't hear about them as much since they're very seagoing raiders. But in terms of Iskidan, which is inspired by the Miklagard and the Eastern Rus tribes, horses were an important culture for those people. Good boy, Courage. Good boy. So William has done Yaromir, and I am now portraying Sulik. So someone else from Iskidan, dressed in similar kind of clothes but a little bit of a different style, and William is the awesome Orca. So yes, so let's just talk about the kit then. So to start with William, we can see that Orca has a bit more of a high class tunic with some tablet weaving, which is very common.
Well, her background is that she's a veteran, so in some ways she would be similar to the kit that Elvar wears, but also she takes on a very different style. She very differently and unconventionally does not have a shield. She prefers to rely on her speed, and she's very different to most people. And there's even some people who point out, you don't have a shield. Also, at some point in the Shadow of the Gods, Orca uses a Dane axe, which is what is considered the expert weapon. Only the experts can wield a Dane axe comfortably and effectively, because it's very easy to leave yourself vulnerable.
Yeah, this weapon became famous most famous really at Stamford Bridge, isn't it? When the lone Viking of Harold Hardrada's army held the Saxons for a few hours on his own on the bridge, taking on duels.
Yeah.
And the only way they killed him was by going underneath and stabbing him up in the gonads.
Yeah, so most Huskarls would would acquire a Dane axe and use it expertly. And now onto, if you want to take the Dane axe for a second, we have a Sayax or Sax, however you want to name it. We actually included a bit of discussion of this in our glossary discussion of the Shadow of the Gods.
Yeah, let me hold the helmet
so
as well.
If you hold the helmet and I can draw it. It's caught a bit on the ring now, so you can see the difficulties of this. A Sax or Sayax, Orca actually has 3 of these, and it's a bit big for me because it's Papa Gwynne's, but usually you would wear this across here, as so.
It
or
dangles
even
in a suspension
behind.
system as found in Burka, so this is made from actually a grave copy.
And to open it, to take it out of the scabbard, you pull there, pull out, and you would thrust it as such. It could be used for cooking, shaving, or for combat. I was serious with the shaving.
Yeah, I know you're right.
But it would only have a single sharp edge, and so you would use it for thrusting as such, not like a sword which is double-edged. And so Orca would actually have 3 Sayaxes. And further on with the kit, obviously we've talked a bit before about thanks Ed, and we've talked a bit before about ring mail. Orca would again have that.
This is a bit of a fuller shirt than last time. It's kind of 3/4 length, comes down to the actual knees, and it also comes past the elbow, so it's just a little bit more protection. She's probably a lot stronger than Elvar as well. She's older, she's a lot taller and bigger,
more used to.
I think both of us are much smaller than Orca as well. Yeah, her body's much more trained as well. Then the hand axe.
Then we have a hand axe, so you'd hold this in one hand, you'd have a sax in the other hand. And so you can hook a shield down, you can stab. Not as much of a throwing axe as we showed with Varg's axe. It's balanced differently. It's balanced more for hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
And then lastly we can...
Well, axes were super popular in the Viking period because they're a multi-purpose tool. They can be used for, as William said, hooking down a shield and taking out the next man in the shield wall, or they can be used for splitting firewood, cutting down trees, that kind of stuff. So axes would be a plenty around a farm, which many warriors were. And Orca at the beginning starts off as someone living with her family
on a household,
on a steading,
yes.
That's it.
And also it would be quite cheap as well, because we talked about earlier that a lot of status would be how much metal is in the weapon, and obviously with an axe,
shows status.
It's just the head.
That does not.
But yeah, so size. But yeah, and then we have the helmet. Again, it has an attire which provides that extra protection around the neck and shoulders, and it's got this additional layer of protection. And again, it's not as fancy as Elvar's was, as Ed showed, but it's still got some extra designs. It's much more flourished and more protective than Varg's basic nasal helm. And so that is Orca. She's quite high ranking, got some very good gear, but she uses them effectively as well, and she has some unconventional methods.
Yeah, so moving on to my side of the kit then, William, if I just pass these over to you. We then have the different style of clothing. Whereas William would wear a tunic, I wear a kaftan, as I am Sulik. Now Sulik is from Iskadan, and he is based around Micklegarth, which is in real life, that's what Micklegarth was. It's Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. In Iskadan, it's a little bit different, but it's inspired by those people. So here we have a saber. Like so, we can see the curve of the saber, used for horseback as well as combat on foot as well. And then we have a different style of axe compared to William's. It's a longer haft as well. It's a smaller head, so it's a bit lighter, but it's also got a hammer on the end. It looks a bit like a 19th century tomahawk, as it were. Yeah, so here we can see the differences, absolutely. So mine's a little bit lighter, but it's also got this at the end as a counterweight. So this would be used for hooking down, or also when you're riding on horseback, you can swing it low and take someone's head off. So yeah, I've also
As
got
you do.
some baggy trousers on in the Rus style. So this is from the Swedes, or the Svea, who then went to Russia, and they went to Stara Ladoga as well. And they went down through the Dnieper River, all the way down to the Byzantine Empire, and they mixed with the Slavs and the Pechenegs and those kind of people, which we spoke about earlier when we saw Yaromir, when William was riding Courage as Yaromir, Prince of Iskidan. So similar, but not as fancy as the lamellar plate armour and the horsehair plume and the bow as well, that Prince Yaromir and his retinue of Drushina would have.